Well, let's talk about the thing you've done for over 20 years, which is fight for the freedom of speech on college campuses. So why is freedom of speech important on college campuses?
Well, it's important everywhere in the society, but it's most important on college campuses. Why? Because that's where we educate our young citizens. And if you are educated under a notion that some dean can call you on the carpet because you say something which is considered racist, or you can say something which is considered dangerous to social cohesion, then it's not a liberal arts college. Now, the theory that I used in the Shadow University,
A book you've written, The Shadow University,
1998.
1998. You were ahead of a lot of these things, by the way.
I'm afraid that as a pessimist, I always saw the bad side of things.
Betrayal of Liberty on America's Campuses, The Shadow University, a book you co-authored with Alan Charles.
Yes, with one of my Princeton classmates, Alan Charles Kors, who's now an emeritus professor of Enlightenment history at the University of Pennsylvania. I only taught for one semester, and I can go into that later, the reason I did not continue to teach in colleges. It was Harvard Law School. I taught a course in the mid-1980s. But in any event, the college campuses are one of the most important of all for free speech, because it's where people get education. And if you don't really get a good education, if certain points of view are not allowed to be expressed, because education comes from the clash of ideas, and you then have to decide this is how you become a thinking adult. You have to decide which ideas make more sense to you, which ones you're going to follow. The college experience is transformative. And if there is censorship on campuses, it's highly destructive of the educational enterprise and ultimately to the entire society. We have in the sciences, we have a scientific method. Scientific method is you try experiments and you see which ones work, and then you develop theories based upon the results of experiments. Well, this is not much different from every other aspect of life. You have to entertain different views on different subjects. You hear all the views, and you make a decision as to which one's accurate and which one's not. So the scientific method I apply to non-science, to history, to journalism, to all of these things.
So that scientific method includes ideas, hateful ideas also.
Correct. If you don't allow hateful ideas, I mean, when scientists do experiments, nobody says to them, don't do that experiment, because it would be very bad if that turns out to be accurate, that outcome. That's not the way it works. Every point of view is thrown into the marketplace, whether it's science or whether it's non-science.
And that includes the kind of ideas and the kind of discourse that might actually lead to an increase in hate on campuses.
The First Amendment prohibits speech which is liable to produce imminent violence.
Yeah.
So, for example, the exception is yelling falsely yelling fire in a crowded movie theater. A lot of people misstate it. They say, the exception is yelling fire in a movie theater. Well, if there's really a fire, you're performing a real important function by yelling fire. But it's falsely yelling fire.
Yeah.
You would start a riot. People would be crushed, try to get out. So there are that's one of the exceptions of the First Amendment, as the Supreme Court has defined it. There are very few exceptions, and defamation is an exception. I'm not a fan of that exception, frankly. But if you say something about somebody that has serious implications in their life, in their ability to earn a living, if you accuse somebody of being a pedophile when it's not true, that person can sue you. My own view is I think that's an unfortunate exception, but I'm not on the Supreme Court. I think that I'm with a friend of mine was Nat Hentoff. Nat Hentoff, who wrote for decades for the Village Voice in New York. He was a friend of mine. He was a free speech absolutist. And he wrote a fabulous book called Free Speech for Me, But Not for Thee. And he was an absolutist, and I'm with Nat Hentoff.
Even on the defamation aspect. I mean, I agree with you in some sense, just practically speaking. It seems like that the best way in the public sphere to defend against defamation is with more speech.
Correct.
And through authenticity, through authentic communication of the truth as you see it.
Yeah. At times the Boston Globe has said something about me that hasn't been accurate. They have invariably published my letter to the editor. Mm-hmm. I'm also not bashful about getting in touch with the reporter. At the end of every column, they give the reporter's email address. And I know people say that I have more access to the media than most people. But all that means is I get defamed more than most people.
Can we also comment on, from the individual consumer of speech, there's a kind of sense that freedom of speech means you should be forced to read all of it. Freedom of speech versus freedom of reach. We as consumers of speech, do we have the right to select what we read?
We do. And nobody can force us to sit in a room and listen to a radio program that we don't want to listen to. Nobody can force us to read a book that we don't want to read. The whole notion of freedom of speech means that people have autonomy on their choices.
In order to form a complete mind, a complete human being, there's a kind of tension of that autonomy versus consuming as many varied perspectives as possible, which is underlying the ethic of free speech. So on college campuses, it seems like a good way to develop the mind is to get as many perspectives as possible, even if you don't really want to.
Well, that is the theory. Academic freedom is supposed to be the highest degree of free speech.
Yeah.
You should be able to entertain all kinds of hateful, threatening ideas. And the way I put it is, there's something wrong when you can say something with complete abandon, without any fear, in Harvard Square, whereas on the other side of the fence, you can't say it in Harvard Yard. It should be the opposite.